Once I learned how to pray correctly, everything in my world transformed from limitation to abundance, from fear to certainty, from wishing to knowing. And when I say that I became a millionaire, do not imagine that money suddenly fell from the sky or that opportunities magically lined themselves at my door without any inner participation. What truly happened was that I awakened to the ancient and eternal truth that prayer is not begging, nor pleading, nor asking some distant deity to intervene. Prayer is the reshaping of the inner self. It is the disciplined art of assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled and resting in that assumption until it hardens into fact. When I discovered this, wealth was no longer something I chased, it became something I embodied. For most of my life, like many people, I misunderstood prayer. I believed it was a verbal request, a series of well-chosen phrases, or attempts to persuade God to do something for me. I knelt, I folded my hands, I asked, but nothing truly changed in my visible world because my inner world remained unchanged. I was praying as a beggar, not as one who knows he already possesses what he seeks. I prayed with anxiety, fear, and doubt, and therefore produced results that matched my internal conditions. Life was simply mirroring back my own insecurity. But once I understood that the real secret of prayer lies not in words, but in the feeling behind the words, not in asking, but in accepting, not in pleading, but in assuming, then everything began to shift. I had read the ancient texts countless times, but I had never truly heard them until I learned this principle. When you pray, believe that you have received it, and you shall have it. This statement is not poetry, it is law. To believe you have received something while your senses deny it feels impossible at first because we are conditioned to bow before facts instead of recognizing that facts are only shadows cast by previous imaginal acts. But once you realize that imagination is the creative power of God within you, you begin to understand that prayer is the movement of consciousness. It is the alignment of your inner state with the reality you wish to experience. And when your inner state changes, your outer world must follow. The day I truly applied this, I was not trying to manifest millions. I simply wanted a sense of stability and freedom. I wanted to wake up in a world where I did not feel limited by circumstances. And so, I sat quietly, closed my eyes, and entered the state akin to sleep, that drowsy but aware condition where the conscious mind quiets and the subconscious becomes receptive. In that gentle inner state, I imagined myself living the life I desired. I imagined conversations with friends where they congratulated me on my success. I imagined the feeling of looking at a bank statement that reflected abundance. I imagined the relief, the ease, the certainty that comes when one knows life is working in their favor. Most importantly, I felt the emotions of having it now, not someday in the future. This was my prayer, not words, not a request, not a wish. It was an inner acceptance. It was the surrender of the old self and the assumption of a new identity. And that identity was not a man striving to become wealthy, but a man who already was. What happened next was not dramatic. There were no explosions of miracles. Instead, there was a quiet unfolding. Ideas began to form. Opportunities arose. People entered my life at the right time, and doors opened that had previously remained closed. I found myself guided by a wisdom I could not have planned with logic alone. It was as if the entire universe rearranged itself to match the state I had entered. And it did, not by magic, but by law. Because consciousness is the only reality, and the outer world is but its expression. I remember the first tangible sign that my prayer had been answered. I received a message from someone I had not spoken to in years. They mentioned an opportunity that aligned perfectly with my talents, something I had never considered before. A small decision, seemingly insignificant, led to a series of events that multiplied in ways I could never have predicted. A single yes opened the flow of abundance. And that flow continued because I continued to pray correctly, not by repeating words, but by returning again and again to the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Neville Goddard often said that the world is yourself, pushed out. If your world is poor, it is because you have been poor in imagination. If your world is limited, it is because you have been limiting yourself internally. Once I understood this, guilt disappeared, fear disappeared, and I realized that wealth is not something granted to the lucky, it is something manifested by the disciplined. The secret words of prayer are not sentences you speak aloud, they are the silent feelings you allow to dominate your inner world. Every day, I practiced this art. I would enter my inner sanctuary, close my eyes, and step into the version of myself who already possessed what I desired. I didn't wait for proof. I didn't check my bank account to see if the outer world had caught up. I simply persisted in the assumption. When old doubts appeared, I didn't fear them. I dismissed them by returning to the feeling of fulfillment. I treated every doubt as a fading remnant of my old self, not as something real or powerful. And slowly, like clay being shaped by a master craftsman, my life molded itself around my new identity. I became a millionaire not because I chased money, but because I changed my state of consciousness. Money became a natural consequence, not the goal. Wealth became an expression, not a pursuit. There were moments where the old reality tried to pull me back, where circumstances looked unchanged, where fear whispered that nothing was happening. But in those moments, I held firm to the principle that imagination creates reality. I reminded myself that the world was only reflecting my former assumptions, and that persistence in the new assumption would override the old. It always did. One of the greatest revelations I had was understanding that prayer is not an act of hope, it is an act of creation. When you pray correctly, you do not ask God to do something. You become the channel through which God expresses. God does not respond to words, He responds to states. The moment you enter the state of your desire, creation is complete. The outer manifestation is simply the slow, deliberate unfolding of what has already been created within. This is why Neville taught that the true secret of prayer is feeling. Feeling is the one bridge between the invisible and the visible. Feeling is the language of the subconscious, the doorway to manifestation, and the signal that commands reality to conform. Feeling is prayer. Feeling is creation. Feeling is fulfillment. I can trace every blessing, every growth, every opportunity back to a single imaginal moment. A moment when I felt something as true long before the world agreed with me, and each manifestation reinforced the principle. Each success was a sermon preached by life itself, affirming that what I imagined with conviction would materialize. As I lived in this understanding, I also realized something deeply important. Wealth is not measured by numbers alone. True wealth is freedom, security, creativity, and peace of mind. Money is simply one expression of abundance, and because I knew how to generate abundance from within, money could not help but follow. Even now, whenever I desire something new, I use the same method. I never chase, I never ask, I assume, I feel, I rest in the end, I pray correctly, and life responds with precision. The world will always tell you to work harder, struggle more, sacrifice endlessly, and chase success as if it is running away from you. But once you learn the true method of prayer, you realize that success is not running, it is waiting. It waits for you to embody it. It waits for you to claim it from within. It waits for you to declare through feeling that it is already yours. I became a millionaire because I dared to feel like one long before I became one. I felt the relief, the gratitude, the expansion of abundance before the first dollar arrived. I walked in the consciousness of wealth, even when the physical facts contradicted me. I refused to be hypnotized by the senses, and because I persisted in this inner world, the outer world yielded. There is a sacred power within every human being, a divine ability to create by assumption. When you understand this, prayer becomes the most natural thing in the world. You no longer pray for what you want, you pray from the state of already having it. And that subtle shift from desire to fulfillment, from asking to assuming, from longing to possessing, makes all the difference. I can tell you with absolute conviction that nothing changed in my life until I changed within. But once I changed within, Nothing could stop the transformation without. Prayer became my secret tool, the instrument through which I rewrote my destiny. And the words of prayer, the secret words, were simply these: it is done. Not please, not someday, not I hope, but it is done. And when I said these words, I wasn't reciting them, I was feeling them. I was stepping into the identity of fulfillment. I was surrendering to the reality that already existed in imagination, knowing it would manifest in the physical world. If you hear me today, hear this: your imagination is your praying ground. Your feeling is your offering. Your assumption is your command, and your persistence is your faith. When these four are aligned, manifestation is inevitable. There were moments when I imagined wealth and felt as though I was deceiving myself. My logical mind argued that nothing had changed, but logic is not the language of creation. Feeling is. And so, even when my senses protested, I persisted in feeling wealthy. I persisted in feeling secure. I persisted in feeling abundant. And through this persistence, I became the version of myself that the world eventually recognized as a millionaire. I did not merely attract money, I became the cause of it. I became the inner state that money responds to. Money flows where consciousness invites it, and consciousness invites by assumption. When I assumed wealth, wealth assumed me. Everything I now enjoy was once a silent, imaginal act. Every breakthrough was once a simple feeling. Every opportunity was once a moment of quiet prayer. I am living proof that prayer, true prayer, creates reality. And here is the greatest truth I learned. God is not separate from your imagination. God speaks through desire. God answers through feeling. And God manifests through your assumptions. When you pray correctly, you align yourself with divine power. You become co-creator of your world. You step into your true identity as one with the creative force of the universe. So when I say that I became a millionaire through prayer, understand that this was not superstition or luck. It was alignment. It was understanding law. It was mastering the art of feeling. It was assuming the state of wealth until wealth became my natural expression. Even now, I give thanks not for what is coming, but for what already exists in imagination. Gratitude is not a response to blessings, it is the generator of them. When I feel grateful before the manifestation, I am declaring that the inner world is more real than the outer. And because the inner is the cause, gratitude becomes the magnet. Today, I live a life that once seemed impossible, not because I worked harder than anyone else, but because I prayed differently. I prayed correctly. I prayed with the consciousness of fulfillment. And fulfillment became my reality. If I have one message to give you, it is this: learn the art of correct prayer. Abandon begging. Abandon hoping. Abandon waiting. Enter the state of the wish fulfilled. Feel the truth of your desire now. Walk as the person you aspire to be. Think from the result, not of it. Let your inner world become richer than your senses, and persist until the outer world conforms. The secret words that transformed my life are simple. It is done. Say them with feeling, and then live as though they are true. For when you pray correctly, creation is instantaneous. The world must eventually reflect the inner decree. And when you master this, wealth, both inner and outer, flows to you effortlessly, abundantly, and inevitably. And as I traveled deeper into this inner world, I began to see with absolute clarity that every limitation I had ever faced was nothing more than a reflection of a limiting belief I had unconsciously accepted about myself. Lack was never a condition of the external world. It was always a condition of my inner assumptions. Poverty was not something life imposed upon me, it was something I assumed to be true. And because I assumed it, I lived it. As soon as that assumption changed, my entire outer world reshaped itself like clay warmed by the fire of new conviction. There came a moment when I realized that correct prayer is not merely an act, it is an identity. It is the awareness that you are the operant power. There is no external force denying you anything. There is no distant God choosing who is blessed and who is not. The one doing the choosing is always you. Through your imaginal activity, your inner conversations, and the feelings you entertain, you are selecting the states you will express in the world. Once I grasped this, I understood why Neville emphasized that imagining creates reality. He wasn't speaking metaphorically, he was stating a literal psychological law. I would often sit in silence and ask myself, what am I imagining right now? What am I feeling to be true? And I noticed that my mind, unless disciplined, would wander into fear, scarcity, and doubt. It would replay old memories of failure. It would rehearse anxieties about the future. It would relive moments where I felt powerless. And those inner conversations, I realized, were prayers too, negative prayers. For every thought is a seed, and every feeling is a command to the subconscious. I'd been praying for lack without realizing it. This awareness changed everything. I started to guard my imagination the way a millionaire guards his fortune. I monitored my inner conversations like a watchman on a tower. Whenever I caught myself imagining from lack, I shifted instantly into imagining from abundance. When fear whispered its old stories, I replaced them with a new inner dialogue rooted in certainty and power. I began to see that the true battleground of life is not the world but the mind, and the moment you win the inner battle, the outer world must surrender. One night, as I lay in bed entering the state akin to sleep, I asked myself a simple question. If I truly were a millionaire right now, how would I feel? Not how would I act, not what would I do, but what would I feel? And in that moment, I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a peaceful assurance, a quiet confidence. It was as though my entire being settled into a deeper level of comfort. That feeling became my prayer. I let it saturate every corner of my mind. I let it sink into my subconscious like a seed planted in fertile soil. And then the most remarkable thing happened. I woke up the next morning still feeling it. Not intensely, but subtly. A gentle hum of abundance beneath the surface of my awareness. Throughout the day, every time I remembered that feeling, I returned to it, reinforcing it, solidifying it. I wasn't trying to force anything. I was allowing the new state to become natural, and slowly, that feeling began to govern my reactions, my choices, my behaviors, and even the way people responded to me. I noticed opportunities that I would have ignored before. I felt confident in conversations where I previously held back. I made decisions with clarity instead of hesitation. It was as if I had become a different person entirely. Not because of external change, but because I had stepped into a new inner identity. This is what Neville meant when he said that states are like rooms in a house. You do not create the room, you simply enter it, and each room contains its own set of experiences, opportunities, and expressions. When I entered the state of wealth, I naturally began to experience what wealth experiences. The world responded to my new identity, as though it had been waiting for me to step into it. One of the most profound realizations I uncovered in this process was that money is not the cause of wealth, but the effect of a wealthy state. Many people chase money, hoping it will give them a wealthy mindset, but it does not work that way. You must first adopt the mindset, the emotional tone, the inner feeling of wealth. Then money appears as the outer symbol of the inner transformation. Wealth follows identity. Money follows assumption. Once I understood this, I stopped focusing on money altogether. I focused on the feeling of abundance. I focused on the feeling of being someone for whom wealth is natural. I cultivated a sense of deservingness, ease, and inner richness, and the outer world simply echoed back what I had accepted within. Another essential lesson in my journey was learning that persistence is the golden key of prayer. There were days when my senses argued loudly against my assumptions. Days when my bank account showed the opposite of abundance. Days when unexpected bills arrived. Days when old fears tried to reclaim their territory. But I chose not to accept these external facts as final. I reminded myself that facts are not truths. They are past manifestations. They are merely evidence of old imaginal acts, and just as they were created, they can be replaced. So whenever something in the outer world contradicted my new assumption, I refused to be moved by it. I persisted in feeling the wish fulfilled. I returned again and again to that inner state of wealth until it became my dominant vibration. And as Neville said, if you persist in the assumption, it will harden into fact. Not because of luck, not because of chance, but because consciousness is the only creative power. There came a time when the persistence became effortless. The state of wealth no longer felt like an assumption I was practicing. It felt like who I was. The old state of lack could no longer pull me back because I had outgrown it. It was like trying to fit into clothing 2 sizes too small. It simply did not belong to me anymore. Around this time, remarkable things began to unfold in my outer world. Opportunities appeared from directions I never expected. Business ideas that once felt unclear became crystal clear. People who had never noticed my work suddenly recognized its value. It was as though the world had awakened to my existence. But in truth, I had awakened to my own power. The world was simply echoing my inner transformation. One of the most powerful manifestations came unexpectedly. I received an opportunity that had the potential to multiply my income in a way I had never imagined. It was presented to me with ease, without strain, without effort. And I realized that this was the fruit of my inner work. I did not chase it. I did not force it. It came because I had become the version of myself who naturally receives such opportunities. As I moved deeper into this understanding, I realized that prayer is not something you do in isolation. It is something you live. Every moment you imagine something, you are praying. Every time you assume a feeling, you are creating. Every thought clothed with emotion is a seed planted in the subconscious, and the harvest is inevitable. Once I understood this, I became far more mindful of the inner seeds I was planting. If a negative thought arose, I did not fear it. I simply replaced it with an assumption that aligned with my desired state. I trained my mind the way a musician trains their instrument, with patience, practice, and deliberate attention. And just as a musician develops mastery, I developed mastery over my inner states. That mastery became the foundation of my wealth. I also discovered that prayer works best when it feels natural. You do not need dramatic imagination. You do not need complicated scenes. You simply need a feeling that implies your desire is fulfilled. Simplicity is power. A single moment of feeling can be more potent than hours of forced visualization. The subconscious responds not to complexity, but to authenticity. There were times when I simply imagined the relief of financial abundance. Other times, I imagined the warmth of gratitude. Sometimes I imagined a simple conversation where someone congratulated me on my success. These small imaginal acts were enough because they carried the essence of the desired state. The subconscious does not require details. It requires conviction. As I lived in this new state, I began to understand why Neville said that creation is finished. Everything you desire already exists as a state of consciousness. You do not create wealth, you select the state of wealth. You do not create success, you step into the state of success. The moment you assume the state, you become it in imagination. And because imagination is the only reality, the physical world must eventually mirror it. This understanding took away all pressure from the manifestation process. I no longer wondered how things would happen. I no longer asked when they would happen. I simply rested in the knowing that the state I occupied would inevitably express itself. There was nothing to force, nothing to chase, nothing to worry about. The feeling was enough. The assumption was enough. And so, day by day, the world shifted. What once felt distant became natural. What once felt impossible became ordinary. Wealth flowed with ease. I experienced financial breakthroughs that I could never have orchestrated with effort alone. And through it all, I kept returning to the principle. Correct prayers assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Even now, I marvel at the simplicity of this truth. It requires no ritual, no ceremony, no external deity. It requires only your imagination, your feeling, your willingness to accept your desire as already accomplished. And once you do, life responds in ways more beautiful than anything the logical mind could conceive. I stand as a testament to this law. Once I learned how to pray correctly, not only did I become a millionaire, but I became the master of my reality. I became the author of my destiny. I became one with the creative power that shapes universes. And what I have done, anyone can do, if they are willing to master the inner world. And so, as I stand before you now, Understand that nothing I have shared is theory, philosophy, or poetic language meant to inspire without substance. It is law. It is the very structure of reality. It is the power that shapes worlds, the power that lifts a man from lack into abundance, the same power that took me from wishing to knowing, from hoping to having, from limitation into infinite possibility. I did not become a millionaire because the world suddenly became kinder to me. I became a millionaire because I became kinder to myself in imagination. I stepped into the version of me who already possessed the wealth, the freedom, the ease, and the abundance my heart desired. And the world simply bowed to that inner decree. If there is one truth I wish to leave with you, it is this: your imagination is the only force that will ever determine the life you live. Not the economy, not your upbringing, not your education, not the opinions of others. When you pray correctly, when you assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, you align yourself with the infinite, creative power that has always been within you. You become the cause, and life becomes the effect. You become the writer, and destiny becomes the page. You become the master, and reality becomes the obedient servant of your inner state. So I invite you now not to admire this principle, but to apply it. Dare to believe in the power that breathes through you. Dare to assume the feeling of your dream as already accomplished. Dare to claim the wealth, the success, the joy that is already yours in imagination. Stand in the end, rest in the end, live in the end, and watch how the world rearranges itself with precision, elegance, and inevitability to bring you the harvest of your assumptions. May you never again pray as a beggar. Pray as a creator. Pray as one who knows that God is your own wonderful imagination. And when you do, when you finally learn to pray correctly, not with fear but with conviction, not with longing but with fulfillment, you too will rise into the world you have secretly carried within you all along. And when that day comes, you will realize, just as I did, that the miracle was never the money. The miracle was the moment you discovered that the power to shape your life had always been yours.